we want to get to what we're going to talk about. So tonight, as I mentioned, we have Miss April Cobb. She, if you didn't hear it earlier, she is a teacher at Jennings Middle School. She's an advocate in the community. And she's also, more importantly for us, she's our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair for Hillsborough County Council. How are you doing, Miss April Cobb?
I am well. How are you this evening?
Good. Thank you so much for taking your time. I know you have 2 kids at home, and I know that is most important. So we appreciate you coming out here. You're going to be talking about an incredibly important subject tonight, and I think, and I'm trying to buy some time for everybody to get on here, and hopefully we'll all come out of here encouraged, willing to have this conversation at our local units, willing to have this conversation at our schools, our neighborhoods, and our communities. So I'm going to start this out with a question, and let's just kind of go from there. And as I told you earlier, this is all about you and your information. So for all of us just hearing the term school pipeline to prison, what does that actually mean?
Well, give me just a moment. Let's get set up here. You put me in a, hold on. All right, guys. All right, so here we go. So there are various terms as it relates to how to define school to prison pipeline. But in a nutshell, for me, it is basically when children are pushed out of the learning environment due to various reasons. And in most cases, it's in alignment with disruption of the education or the learning environment. But what it does not explain or provide a solution to is that a child needs to be educated. And if they're not educated, they're gonna, in most cases, lead to a life of crime. So the term that school to prison pipeline, for a definition that is more well put together, it reads here that it's a disturbing national trend where children are funneled out of schools and basically into the juvenile justice system. So the ACLU, is one of the key resources that we use to reference about school to prison pipeline for up-to-date information. So historically, children just have been getting the brunt of it, if they are not falling into the status quo of what I refer to as the perfect child.
Now, so what are the children themselves? Which children are being most impacted by this?
Well, let's go back a little bit before we jump into that for me, Frank. So,
okay, go ahead.
So why is school to prison pipeline flourishing in public school sector? That's one of the key things that we need to look at. And because we're so quick to say, well, it's the child, the behaviors are poor. They're coming from, poor backgrounds and so on and so forth. But there are more elements to that versus it just falling into the responsibility being in the child's lap. So one of the key indicators that we have, discovered during our research is that inadequate resources in public schools is one of the key indicators. If you have a school, like we have many here in our district, that are not adequately supported with the necessary technology, resources, updated books, there are some schools that, are just outdated overall as it relates to resources. So when you have things as such like that happen, it falls into the lap of the teacher trying to compensate in various areas in order to balance that, level that playing field as it relates to the quality of education that's being provided in their classrooms. And then right now, if nothing else is more relevant than any time before today, is the overcrowded classrooms. With COVID being at the forefront of all of the discussions worldwide, classrooms are not the way that they used to be in relationship to how students are capable of being able to function on for a sense of normalcy. So with the classrooms being even more overcrowded, COVID being at the forefront of the conversation, it is just overwhelming to say that we're going to have more kids that are in the high instance of just teachers being sensitive, people being sensitive with the COVID situation, that there is a heightened level of sensitivity of just behaviors not being accepted for, you know, just minor things. So a child could drop a pencil on the ground and it could possibly be an issue because it might fall over underneath the desk that's too close to another child. So something so simple could just raise, you know, all types of chaos that very much so isn't really that important. But with COVID being, you know, again, at the forefront, it very well could be. And then we have teachers that are not just qualified to be in specific learning environments, specific schools. And that's not to say that they're not good teachers. It's just saying that certain schools desire or have the students' needs are indifferent than a teacher that could be a little bit more seasoned and knowledgeable about some things that a new teacher that may not necessarily be aware of. So I'll get to that a little bit more, I think, later on in the content, but I'll just move forward. And funding. Funding in Hillsborough County. I'm just going to pin that there because we know right now we are at a deficit in many areas with no true understanding as to how we got there. It's really not our responsibility to figure it out. All we do know that insufficient funding is an issue. And most definitely when it comes to that, we're not capable of hiring more counselors and nurses versus more officers in our schools. And then lack of special education services. We know our ESE population requires more. They just require more. And in a lot of situations, we just don't have the funding for the more, even though the dollars are supposed to be put in place for that population of children. For some unknown reason, as a teacher for right at 23 years, I just don't see the additional funding that's allocated for that population of children. So it just becomes a place of just always trying to stay ahead, for teachers trying to stay ahead and stay equipped with having what they feel is going to do, provide the best education or the quality education for their students in the classroom, which can be overwhelming once again for the teachers. Right, do you all hear me? Because y'all just looking at me.
No, you're doing great. I didn't know.
Okay.
You're doing great.
So when you ask the question as it relates to what population of children or who is it impacting the most, well, let's look at that a little bit. So there are students from two groups, and children, that's the racial minorities and children with disabilities. And it goes without saying that it is disproportionately represented as it relates to school to prison pipeline. The question becomes why? And we have not been capable of literally fine-tuning a solution, or not a solution, an answer to that, because there's so many moving parts as it relates to a child arriving on a school campus and then expected to be provided a quality education. There's so many other moving parts around that. It goes without saying, is the teacher qualified? Is the teacher equipped to be able to work with that specific population or demographic of children? It goes without saying, is administrative? Is the administrative staff, is it diverse enough? It goes without saying, the social worker, the school nurse. I mean, everyone on campus plays a role in overall how a child could end up in school to prison pipeline or funnel into the school to prison pipeline from the school setting. And I just don't know why it has went on this long, and why here in Hillsborough County, we're currently leading that pack for the state of Florida. Black students are suspended or expelled at a rate of almost 3.5 times greater than white students. And then the question still goes back to the why. Why isn't that number a little bit more balanced as it relates to the disciplinary actions that are provided for all children in the event that we're saying that we are providing equity in all of this? Equity also has to be implemented in discipline. It can't apply one set of disciplinary actions or consequences for one group of children, and then for another group of children, it's not so much. So it becomes a place of the question that always comes to the forefront of my mind is, why is it happening? And why hasn't it been addressed? Why hasn't it been addressed aggressively to a place that we were able to disrupt it to where we could have changed the narrative or shift the narrative to where these numbers aren't on a constant incline? So for example, Black students are more often disciplined for more subjective offenses. And that goes from like throwing food, cursing, disobeying a teacher, so forth. And again, it goes back to the why. And I know for me, you know, based on my experience, a lot of times it's because the lack of cultural competency from some of our staff, and also just lack of cultural awareness in general for the population of children that we're serving at different schools. So for example, I try in most cases to treat all children the same. I do. I make great efforts to do it. But you know, there are things that I have experienced in my life that I know in my culture that African American boys need to do things indifferently in order to be considered successful based upon what is defined as success in the learning environment, because I'm gonna stay positive in that conversation. So if we look at our visual tool right here, our infographic here, it definitely should raise awareness for, you know, anyone that would see it. Even though the document at the bottom, it says 2009, 2010, I like this to 2010. I liked it because it hasn't changed for the better. It actually has gotten worse, because you see it in the document, it says 3.5 times more. We have not seen the data for since 2018, 19, because a lot of our, like I said, information come from the ACLU, and they had not put out the report yet. But I almost would want to be able to bet money and know that I will win, that the numbers have increased. The numbers definitely have increased. And the question remains, why? So who is responsible for this alarming trend of school to prison pipeline in public education? So as you all can see, I have everyone that I believe come in contact with students on a day-to-day basis. That's your school resource officers, your administrative staff, teachers, parents, and students. In my opinion, all of us are. We're all responsible. Every single person that's listed here. Now, the student's level of responsibility isn't different than ours. We're responsible for teaching our children, educating them on what the expectation is, and then remember that they are children. And I think a lot of times we forget that, because immediately their consequences that they're receiving don't align with them being able to know that making mistakes are okay, but the mistakes that they don't want to make is one that will take their lives or take their freedom. And unfortunately, our Black and brown children, they don't have that luxury in school in most cases to be able to make that choice as it relates to their freedom. Because according to the data, we are funneling them in, like it said, 3.5 times more likely than their white peers. And the question goes back to the why. Why is that happening? So as it relates to the school resource officers, I understand why they are there, but I don't understand why there isn't more support staff in our schools as it relates to nurses, as it relates to our psychologists, as it relates to our social workers. Those are support services that can be a remedy in efforts to assist the child with changing the behaviors that are demonstrated or not warranted as being as acceptable. Let me just say that. Because some of the behaviors, they may demonstrate being BAD, is what my grandmother used to refer to it as, but it's not as bad as the consequence that they're receiving. So in my opinion, we're all responsible. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What can we do indifferently in order to shift or change this narrative for all children in Hillsborough County Public Schools? However, with the emphasis on the majority that's being impacted right now, and that's going to be our Black boys. So right now, we need to rethink discipline. And this is something that before I go into that, I want to ask Alicia unmute for a moment. She is our VP for, I might be saying this wrong, y'all know I'm still working on this, for programs for the HCCPTA. Are you there, Alicia?
Here.
Hi, how are you, hon?
Hey.
So I wanted you to take a moment and share why you thought it was important for us to talk about this topic as one of the programs or I guess you could say future workshops that we would like to see kind of spiral for other PTAs here in Hillsborough County? Why did you find that it would be important?
So I'm the VP of Advocacy.
Sorry.
That's okay, for Hillsborough County PTA. And it was important for us as a board to have this topic and these upcoming events happen to bring awareness and to have the uncomfortable conversations with some people that can make change. And that's what we're looking for as it relates to the Prison in the Pipeline. We need change. We need to have conversations with people that can actually make this happen. So as April come in as the DEI chair and as partnering with SAC, is for us to educate the community and reach out to different people as our congressmen and women and our mayors and different people out there who sit in roles and sit in positions that can help change this. We should not lead to the school to prison pipeline. That is something Hillsborough County has to work on. And with SAC having a team of educators, social workers, and parents that are willing to do the work, why not partner with PTA to help get it done?
Thank you very much. Really quickly, Ashley, can you give an overview of what SEC is for me real quick?
Look, I have to make sure I'm unmuted. I've been Zooming all day and sometimes I'll go on a tangent and I'm on mute. But the Sunshine Education Coalition is a collective group of educators, a grassroots organization that is just trying to have the purpose of overall bringing awareness to communities about the school to prison pipeline. We really want to address this big disparity amongst the minority and just make sure that we can bridge the gap and close the prison to pipeline in Hillsborough County, specifically as it pertains to Black students.
Thank you very much. So I know that a lot of times we make reference to our standardized assessment, and when teachers talk about it, I think it takes on a negative connotation that we just don't want children testing. That's not what it is. We understand that we have to test our students in order to be able to identify if there's growth or there's lack of growth. Because if there's no growth, then we need to do something different to make sure that we are preparing students for life. That's our vision for Hillsborough County students. So therefore, if we don't test them, then we don't know exactly if they are demonstrating academic growth or not. However, one test should not be the indicator or should not be the primary resource to validate whether or not a child is demonstrating growth based on that test. A teacher should have more input or involvement in that. But currently, that's not the case, but it is very important that parents, students, and our community members realize that reading or the lack thereof is one of the key funneling elements into school to prison pipeline. When our children demonstrate that they're not capable of passing their benchmarks, third grade being that key one, they're developing more and more possibilities for becoming an inmate. So Denise, if you can't unmute yourself and talk about the literacy component as it relates to school to prison pipeline.
Hey everybody, hi, I'm Denise. So in terms of, I'm so glad we're talking about literacy because that's my big thing. The biggest thing we need to understand is that we also have a cultural, a diversity gap in terms of literacy. The reason why a lot of our kids are falling behind is because they're not making a connection with the actual text. They don't see themselves in the text. That's first of all. So and then because they're so far behind right now, we have to go to a back to basics type of a mentality. We can't jump in and start off with 9th grade text even though I have 7th graders in front of me, but you have to realize the data is telling us that they're reading at a 1st grade reading level. So now I have to go back and say, okay, let me start at the very beginning and teach them foundational skills. Okay, look, here's a piece of paper, left to right. You know, understanding that punctuation is important, understanding the validity of capitalization. I mean, people don't seem to understand how low and how behind the kids are to where you have to go to that basic skill. So that's the other thing we need to look at, besides the fact that the curriculum need to be more diverse, that mirrors who they are, but also understand that we have to address the reading gaps that as they exist right now, and be conscientious of the fact, just like April was talking about COVID, we need to be conscientious of the fact that they've already lost almost an entire year of education. So we can't jump in, which is directly tied to behavior, okay? So we can't jump in and start saying, okay, let's start off at 9th grade. They've missed an entire testing year. So, you know, they lost all of FSA testing from last year. They've lost all of the their final exams. They also, just the self-esteem, the lack of that bonding that they could have had with the teacher at the end of the year to encourage them for the following school year. That's a key component that's also missing. And then also, there's no cross-curriculum support. Everybody wants to operate in a silo. So, you know, the reading department is like, okay, we're all a reading department, but we don't care about nobody else, or math is not involved in reading, and social study. Reading ties to everything. If you cannot get that reading together, everything else is going to falter. So it's very important that we understand how important reading is overall. And then finally, one point I wanted to make was that it goes right back to what April was saying, which ties all the way around to what we're talking about in terms of pipeline to prison. We have got to, teachers themselves have got to understand their own biases, and it allow them to be able to relate material better to the kids. So if you're able to take a piece of text that you might not be comfortable with, you might not like, but guess what? It's good for the student. Get over your own personal feelings and say that this piece of text is going to work for you. You might not want to read the poet X. You might not want to read The Hate U Give. But guess what? The kids want to read that. And if that's encouraging them to read, then that's the most important part. It's all about the children.
Thank you very much, Denise. And after hearing all of those elements, talking about SEC, talking about PTA and us partnering with SEC, talking about the literacy component and the importance of it, now it becomes a point of how does it impact family? I don't think anyone really thinks about the end results of all of this before we get into how to divert it here in Hillsborough County, because that's the population of children that we're concerned about, the ones that's here in our very own backyards, our neighbors, and our children in our schools. So let me make sure that she's still here. Miss Conchita, if you don't mind to share some insight on how school to prison pipeline impacts family.
I would love to. My personal experience, I have two brothers, and I'm going to share the story in a sense. When you hear it, it's going to sound like it's today. So my two brothers, of course, were in Hillsborough County School District, and many times were suspended over and over again. And one time was actually suspended for passing gas. It's a true story. And my mother called me up because I'm about 4 years older, and she calls me Chica. She said, Chica, I don't understand why are they continue to get suspended. So my brother's fractions, I call them, or incidents in school range from having minor conflicts with a student in class, from maybe not turning homework in, those type of things. The stressor on my mother was because single parent, household of poverty, many things that was happening in our household that people didn't know. These things range from, unfortunately, due to the fact that we migrate here from Newark, New Jersey. Even though we was born here, we moved here, really didn't have much. So there were many times that the food was limited. Many times we didn't have lights, we didn't have water. We moved into what we call the church house. So there were a lot of hardship going on in the household. So those things were then carry on and transfer in the classroom environment.
Now, my brothers were not the type of students that, you know, that were fighting, even though there were conflict, but it always, you know how you say you see smoke and then it's fire? So the conflict would be there. And then because of that, then it may have, they probably had a fight or so. And then it was a lot of things of moving into a new environment. My brother was from up north and was telling people, even though we lived in New Jersey, they were telling people they were from New York. So then that caused another layer of conflict. But what I saw looking back, no one really asked a question, you know, what is going on in the household? So when I think back, and I think even though that was about 25 years ago, and when I shared the story, it's happening today. So the reason that I'm part of this committee, mainly because, you know, I believe in a cause. Both of my brothers, of course, of African Americans, they end up, unfortunately, going to prison. One of them went to jail, one of them went to prison. Once they got out, of course, their life has changed. You look at them now, you'll never know. But they had several incidents of prison, going to jail, which caused a conflict as they became parents. So they're better, of course, they're great parents now, but just that domino effect of how their life could have been so much different. So for me, I think it's important when we're looking at the school to prison pipeline, just to kind of bring it back to that, is to really ask those guiding questions that April kind of talked about. You know, what are we doing in our schools? How is there implicit biases? There was another situation in reference to my brother, because they were known to cause some type of, you know, conflict, not nothing major. When something went on in the school, guess who were blamed for it? So they were always the ones that were blamed most of the time. So a couple of times my brother would call me and say, you know, they called my nickname is Chi-Chi. They say, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. So when we talk about school to prison pipeline, we need to look at, as April said, the family. I wish when I look back, someone would have had the conversation with my mother, really understand what was going on. My mother had to work crazy hours, which allowed a lot of idle time. So for me, the family is key. I do not think that we can correct the school to prison pipeline without the connection and the support of the community. So we needed the community, we needed the school, we needed more people to have the conversation. So even though it was 25 years ago, the fact of the matter is that we still see it today, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Conchita. So now we are here. How can school districts divert the school to prison pipeline? And these are the 7 elements that I think that would be a start and help support changing or shifting the narrative in our district here. The key one is train the teachers on the use of restorative practices and positive behavior supports for at-risk students. And when I say at-risk students at this point, that basically means all students, all students. And I will say again, with the emphasis on the Black boy, because that particular child is the one that is definitely receiving the harsher stance in all of this. Increase the use of restorative practices for interventions and supports. Do more than just list them in the MTSSRTI make plans. Do more than just put it on paper. Increase the use of it. Create the time so that it can be done with fidelity. Educate parents on the restorative practices and include them in the process. Like Conchita said, if we don't include family in all of this, then therefore we are missing the key person or people that are capable of supporting what's going on in school. I believe that once family was not seen as a necessity in most cases as it relates to education until the children became a problem or demonstrating behaviors that are deemed not warranted or appropriate in school, that's when it became more of an issue. Compile annual reports on the total number of disciplinary actions that push students out. We need to look at it based on the class, based on gender, based on race and ability. Because a lot of times we're trying to create these blanket or one system fits all kids, and it doesn't. We need to do something indifferent for all children. Create agreements with our police departments and court systems to limit arrests on school campuses. I know the use of restraints such as mace, and I don't think we use tasers here in Hillsborough County, but I know the use of mace in some counties is happening, and I've never seen it in Hillsborough County, but I do know that the restraints are happening. So there might be more of a conversation that needs to happen prior to the child getting to that place with the school nurse, with the school social worker, with the school psychologist, in efforts to, you know, put out the fire before it becomes completely inflamed. And then also provide simple explanations of infractions prescribed in response to the student's code of conduct. Our student code of conduct book is huge. Have you all read it or attempted to read it? No parent is reading all of that. It needs to be simplified, straight to the point. In most cases, 2 pages and the font above an 8. Otherwise, it's too much information for a parent to digest, nevertheless a child. So it needs to be simplified and create appropriate limits on the use of law enforcement in schools in general. We need to have more social emotional learning components versus more police officers. That's just the bottom line. We were at a better place, in my opinion, when I was a child, where there were no sight or scene, there was no police officers there. We had more wraparound services back then. And right now we are struggling to have any type of extra hands on deck on a campus outside of the minimum. Well, we know that there are certain schools that require much more. And especially our transformational schools, they require much more in our district. However, we see that there are some streamlining that is happening that not necessarily should be occurring based upon the needs of our students at these particular types of schools. However, all schools have different needs. So we don't want to only limit it to transformational schools, but identify what are the needs based on the population of students or the demographics of students that are being served. So in a nutshell, sorry, I went too far, y'all. How is it that we can, PTA can get involved with supporting parents, teachers, and students to shift the narrative for our children here in Hillsborough County? We're doing it right now. We're bringing awareness to the parents and the teachers about the impact of school-to-prison pipelines in our district. And we need to use district data so that the numbers can definitely resonate and make it personal for us. We're tired of hearing the blanket term right now where campaigning is happening. These are our children's lives. We need more than just it to be a buzz conversation right now or a buzz word. We need it to become much more than that. And the only way to do that is to bring it to the forefront of conversations. Because again, I will keep stressing it. There's no reason why a Black boy is being suspended or expelled 3 times more likely than their peers. There's no reason why. There's none at all. And then right behind them is the Hispanic male. And the question still falls under, you know, why? Why is it happening? And there's no explanation. There's many different components that attribute to it, but we still cannot provide a true answer or as to why. Another way that PTAs, our local PTAs can support parents and teachers with this is to host entry-level school-to-prison pipeline and restorative practices workshops, because we have to educate the individuals or the families that are being impacted by it, and also educate our teachers on what they may not necessarily know is happening when they are writing that referral or not taking the time to build that relationship with the children and know more about the families as it relates to why the child may be demonstrating inappropriate behavior in the classroom or in the school setting. So we have to go the extra step. And there are certain schools that requires and demands more. There are more schools that require and demand more. So with that understanding, be intentional about the school that you go and interview at, understanding that the needs are different, understanding that it might require for you to stay a little extra and do a little more. because those children require and need more, and all children deserve an opportunity to be successful. Unfortunately, all of them are not receiving that. So the question I put out there for everyone, what are you going to do indifferently now that you know this information? What do you do? Frank?
Wow. First and foremost, ladies, all of you, thank you so much. Every one of you added so much to the conversation. I learned a ton tonight. I know our people who are listening. So thank you all for all of that. First and foremost, I want to make sure every one of you knows how appreciative I am and our PTAs are for each one of you coming on and talking about what was on your heart and on your mind. A couple of things that you kind of hit on that I had written some notes on originally that are just, they're numbers, they're more numbers, although there's one statement I want to read to you. The first one was nationwide, research shows that graduation rates for Black males is 59%. I know you hit on that a little bit. And inmates, whereas 68% of inmates have not completed their high school education. There's absolutely a connection there. There's no doubt that there's a connection. And so reading that and going back behind, I guess the step behind that is, I think we have, in a society, as a school district, have all of a sudden just a lot of the issues that the kids deal with and have problems with, we immediately take them to the school resource officer instead of working with them in the class. And the worst thing we could do is get those kids suspended or expelled, because when they're out of school, we're losing the battle anyway. At least if they're in school, they're being around other kids, they're getting educated, even if it's by osmosis, they're getting educated, but at least they're being told that you matter, that you're important, as opposed to being suspended and expelled where it's, hey, we're just taking you out of the equation so you don't disrupt the rest of us. And that's a terrible thing to tell a student, a kid, no matter what they're doing, because what are they going to learn from there in the future? So I think those are two things. I think another thing that I was reading, underlying causes of some of these when kids are acting out: trauma, substance abuse, mental health, academic deficiencies, poverty. These are things that kids don't have a choice. I mean, if they have an academic deficiency, it's not because they chose that. If they're living in poverty, it's not because they want to live there. If they're having trauma in their life, it's not because they caused it upon themselves. And I think and the reason why I brought that up is because you talked about teachers being that gatekeeper almost of recognizing these things in kids and being able to ask that question, hey, what's going on at home? And seeing the signals before they get to the point where the kid is acting out because he or she can't seem to get anybody to respond to them. So some of these numbers, I think the other one too, that a number is, while there's 8.6% of children in public schools are identified as having disabilities that impact their ability to learn, studies show that on average, 32% of youth in juvenile corrections have been previously identified as having special learning needs. Why are these kids in corrections facilities if they're having difficulties and disabilities learning? And again, it goes back to the teachers having the ability, having the time, having and being the training too, of being able to recognize that and steering them in a different path, as opposed to them being sent directly to a corrections facility, finding an alternate path for them. Did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And just some numbers that can definitely, they startle me every time I hear them and say them, that it says Black children constitutes 18% of students, but they account for 46% of the students suspended more than once. Mm-hmm. How is that possible? Yeah. And we're not talking duplicates, we're talking separate incidents, separate children.
Right.
How is that possible? And then it says about 1 in 4 Black children with disabilities were suspended at least once, versus 1 in 11 white students were suspended.
Right. So, yeah, I saw those numbers. No, I was saying I saw those numbers. They stick out. I mean, they absolutely. There's. It just seems like this. It's an abnormal number. It can't work like that. So let me ask you a question here. And anyone's willing or welcome to answer this. Parents, we need to look ourselves in the mirror too. I know you mentioned that earlier, that we're part of the equation here, but we really need to look at ourselves, because for years, as you mentioned, April, growing up, we didn't, and I'm the same way. I didn't have these issues coming up as much as I see them now with our schools and behavior and acting out. But as parents, we need to take ownership of some of this. So
we have to. Go ahead, Ashley.
I think it's important, because I'm also a Hillsborough County teacher, that we have parents take accountability and ownership for the issues, but we also have to really take a deep look at our schools continuing to provide parents the safe space to do that and advocate for their children, because sometimes parents come and they come in a manner that may not be acceptable to you because they're upset or they're frustrated, and then that is now taken to a separate issue where a parent receives a civility letter and the child is still left without being serviced properly. That family still needs help, and now there's another component, this civility letters, that's keeping them from, getting the services that they need.
Thank you, Ashley. And again, these are things that as parents, we don't see that unless we're actually involved in that and we're part of it, and we have to understand, and it doesn't solve the issue at the end of the day. So we need to take a good hard look at ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, this is my kid, and maybe my child needs a hug, needs some love, needs to be sat down and spent some time with, needs to be encouraged, supported. Maybe needs to see a counselor, maybe needs a friend, maybe needs a teacher who's a mentor, whatever it may be. But we need to be on the hook for finding that for our kid. We can't expect our students, our kids, to be grown adults at this age and go looking for, solutions to what they're dealing with, especially in this age and time.
I totally agree.
Denise, did you have to say something?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was on mute. but that's a key point right there. A lot of times, and I teach middle school, so a lot of times what I get from the kids is that they're already placed into an adult role early in life. So I went to school. Imagine you're the oldest sibling, and your parent has already gone to work, and now you've had to feed your siblings. You have to give them a bath, you have to get them ready to put them on the bus to school, and you've been up for like 2 or 3 hours, and now you school, and now immediately after you've been placed in an adult role for 3 hours of the morning, you're immediately being told by an adult, okay, now you got to act like a child, sit in your place and do your work and everything like that. So we need a space for those kids to decompress before they even interact with the rest of it, because they've been placed and put into such adult roles early. So that's something that a lot of teachers are not understanding about the not only the age group that they're dealing with, but also the socioeconomic background of our children.
Yes.
I'd like to add something too. There's another component that I experienced as well. I used to act, being an administrator for the district, I used to act as assistant principal. So some of the question as we do the work is policy and procedures. So as I was acting as the principal to show equity, you basically don't have too much wiggle room, because of the fact, typically what should happen, you're supposed to show equity. So if I suspend Johnny for 5 days for cursing, then Sally comes in, or another student comes in, then I have equity, I have to do the same thing. But what I'm learning is that sometimes we have to, part of that training April talks about, is that we have to teach them around how do you deal with what is going on, because one act is not the same. If a student walked up and just hit a kid, of course that's blatant, hitting a student. But if that student, another student was calling his mother dirty and all these type of things, you poor, I saw your house, and then the student hit, then not to say the hitting is right, but then as the administrator, I need to look at it from a different lens. So I also think as we're having this conversation, we should look at our policy and procedures, because as an administrator, I had to follow certain policy and procedures when that student walked in. And these facts around school to prison pipeline, trauma, all the things that my brothers experienced was not part of the equation. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you so much, Conchita. Yes, exactly what you said. And by the way, I appreciate you sharing the story with your family. I know that's sometimes very personal, but it's important for other people to hear that. So thank you. I know somewhat, I think we're about at the hour, so I know we need to end at some point, but I guess an uplifting story I did read is in Clayton County, Georgia. The referrals from schools what they did was they got the juvenile courts that made an agreement with the police force in the school district, restricting the cases in which police were allowed to arrest students in school or refer them to court. The agreement had a huge impact, and the high school graduation rate increased 24% from 2004 to 2010. So right then and there, instead of doing what we would all sometimes feel is the easiest course of action by sending that kid away and getting them out of class, by spending that extra few minutes and allowing them to stay in school and be part of school and maybe have a counselor or somebody else just speaking to them, increased, a quarter, almost 25%. That's an incredible number in just 6 years.
I agree.
So again, we're at an hour. I'm so thankful for each one of you. I really, really am. It's such an important subject. It's one that I think we all, many of us, don't know the right questions to ask. And tonight, you gave us a lot of great answers and gave us a lot of our PTA leaders a place to start with the conversation. As I told April, we're a group of 15 or 16. We have 210,000 kids in the school, so we can't do all the work here. So our job is to get the information to our PTA leaders and our caregivers and our parents. And I'm so thankful each one of you are here tonight to offer up what was on your mind and on your heart. Is there anything before we finish up that anyone would like to say? Because I want to make sure everyone has their piece tonight.
I will add that on October 22nd from 7 p.m. to 8:15, we're going to continue this conversation on as it relates to school to prison pipeline with the partnership with the Sunshine Education Coalition. And our theme is illuminating school to prison pipeline, where we'll go a little bit more in depth with the statistical data. We know tonight we want to keep the conversation entry level or introductory level so that it didn't come off so negative. But we did want to, share some insight on to get people to start thinking about school to prison pipeline and truly how is it impacting their children? Because even though it may not directly be impacting them, it does have an effect on all children in the learning environment. So that's very important that we think about that. Even though my child is not being funneled into it, however, it still impacts my child. Because remember, they have to grow up and become adults at some point. Who are they going to? Who are their co-workers going to be? Who are their church members going to be? Who are their neighbors going to be? So at some point, they're going to see the remnants of that impact at some point in their lives. So I invite all of you all to join us on the Sunshine Education Coalition and attend that event as well.
Very good. Amy Marie, are you still hiding back there somewhere? I'd like to have her come on camera if she can.
Marie is still hiding.
She's still hiding.
Yes.
I want to make sure everybody knows Amy Marie is, there she is. Amy Marie is the one who kind of puts these on each and every week. She is the brains behind the operation. I'm so thankful to have her on here as well as Alicia. I have to say it to Alicia because, she pays me to say nice things about her.
I do.
I love it.
And the check's in the mail. But thank you, Amy Marie. I want to make sure everybody recognizes who you are and that you're behind the scenes doing some incredible work. With that, ladies, thank you so much. I do encourage you, again, I know this is kind of for me, to encourage the guys out there, whether they're neighbors, uncles, brothers, principals, anybody, for the 27th for male engagement and mentoring. I think mentoring definitely has a piece in what we talked about tonight. I think I've heard story after story lately about a child who had one person in their life that changed the trajectory of their life. And I as the first male president in Hillsborough County Council, I want to make sure that the men pull their weight a little bit. And so hopefully that's the start of many things. So with that, thank you very much. And we can conclude this for tonight. Go ahead.
I want to add something
Sure.
for the walk girl track. We need more ladies to come out. We need more of our Black African American ladies to come out and support this event. Because it's mainly about us. We have to start exercising, start taking care of ourselves, because you know the pipeline of prison, our kids need us. Our kids need us to be healthy and be there for them. And we cannot do that if we're not taking care of ourselves and doing what we need to do as it relates to our health. So the information Amy Marie will have on the page. But ladies, on the 14th, I need you all out there ready to walk. If you need walking shoes, Lynn Gray was able to collect some great new and used walking shoes. So whatever it is that you need to get you there, please reach out to the PTA and we will support you, because we need you there to, walk and have a good conversation so we can be healthy. Thank you, Frank.
Amen. Amen. All right. Anything else? I want to make sure everyone had a chance. Okay. Again, April, thank you for being a guest. I think Saturday Night Live, if you do 5 appearances, you get like the jacket. So this is your
All
second.
right, I'll be waiting on it.
Yeah, you're gonna get a jacket soon. So, but again, thank you, and I hope all of you ladies, if you're not already in the Hillsborough County Council PTA page, jump on there, hit like, because we want you to share this information out to our other units. If they didn't get a chance to hear this stuff, we want you to continue the conversation there. So, it's such a huge county, and it's just there's no right way to get all the information out, but having you on there would be a big help. So with that, thank you very much. And I guess we're done for the evening, correct? All right. Good night.
Good night, everyone.